Hi, I'm Alice the Fabric Ninja, and today we are making a unicorn hood. This pattern combines my Just Add Ears hood with the Make It a Unicorn pack. You can download both of these free on my website. Just follow the link below. Today I'm making everything from fleece, but you can use any fabrics that you desire to use. This pattern works with both woven and knit fabrics. Before we get into the unicorn, I want to take a moment to tell you a little bit more about this pattern, the Just Add Ears hood. Certainly it comes in your standard hoodie shape, which is what we're using to make this unicorn, but it also comes in an elf twirl shape and a pixie point. All of these are available in the same pattern, and the pattern comes in sizes from newborn doll all the way up to one that fits my big noggin. There are 6 sizes. So whoever you are making a hat for, I have a size for you. The Make It a Unicorn pack and our Dino Spikes pack are perfect to go along with this hood, and they are both available for free download. If you are looking to add even more ears to your collection, I have the Animal Elements ear pack, which has about 13 different types of ears and makes about 20 different animals. It's a lot of ears. So make sure you follow the link below and it'll give you all the information you need. So let's make ourselves a unicorn. I want to take a moment and just talk about the features of this hood. The neckband can be folded up and down to customize the height of the hood, either depending on how you like the fit that day or as your child grows. These hoods are designed to fit for multiple years, so you want to be able to customize the fit as your child gets older and bigger. So the neck can be folded and also the face can be folded. This fold back face feature is also great on even the adult sizes, because when the wind is really blowing, it's nice to be able to have your hood farther out from your face so the wind doesn't get to your nose. Same thing with kids on very blustery days. Having the extra protection along the sides can keep their face warmer. Because of these 2 design features, I like using my fabrics for the inside and the outside that coordinate with each other. So the baby size has only the smallest amount of fold back, but you still can do it to get that adorable color change here. And certainly you could do this and it would make the baby hood more of a preemie size. So let me get out our fabric and patterns and let's make this. To make your hood, you're going to need the instructions if you want to follow along with them. And just so you know, they are incredibly detailed. There is not a step left out, and there are comprehensive yardage charts, so you'll know exactly what you need. And last, you need your pattern. It's very important when printing a pattern to make sure that you check the size here. Just to make sure when you print that you are selecting no scaling or print at 100%. That is how you end up with everything the right size. So the first thing you need to do is actually measure that size square. Perfect, exactly 2-inch square. So I know that these have printed the right size. And now it's time to put them together. Some people like to use tape, some people like to use glue. I'm actually a tape girl, but my friend swore if I just used glue stick a couple of times, I would love it. So we all have to learn new things sometimes, and today, I'm going to use a glue stick. Here on my pattern, you can see what order the pages go together. And in the background of the pattern, you can see the bigger number. So you can see that this is page 10. So it's going to go down here. And then 9, 8, and 7. But you actually don't even need this grid here. If you look on the pattern, you will see stars go one way and crosshairs go the other. These 2 crosshairs both have an E on them, so you know that it's actually the same crosshair that you're going to be overlapping. And these stars both have a 5 and these both have a 6, so you know that those are the ones that you'll be overlapping. The easiest way to put patterns together is when you have a source of light from underneath. Now this can be taping them onto a window. It can be putting your cell phone underneath so the light goes from one to another, or sticking a glass baking pan with a flashlight underneath of it. I happen to have a little light box, so it's what I'm going to use for this video. Now, it's no fancy light box. This thing is from like the 50s, but it works perfectly for what we're doing. So here we go. I can see I have 2 D's and 2 crosshairs, so I know those go together. And if I want to check it, we have a 7 and an 8. So I'm just gonna add some glue. I'm gonna turn this so you can see a little bit more of it in the light box. I'm gonna just put them right on top of each other. And so I know they are perfectly aligned because these pieces look, you don't see any difference between them. They perfectly line up. And if something wiggles, because this is glue, you can just peel it off, give it a little wiggle if you have anything not lined up quite right, and put it right back on. So let's do the next 2 pages. Everything is ready to go. Now that I have my pattern pieces put together, I'm just going to roughly cut around them to make it easier when I'm cutting out my fabric. So you can see the different shapes here: Hoodie, Pixie, and the Elf. The rotary cutter that I'm using here is just for paper. It's one of my old rotary cutters that's not sharp enough for fabric anymore. If you haven't sewn before, or it's been a while since you've sewn, I want to talk you through all the different markings on a pattern so you know what you're looking at here. We already covered our square here, which tells us if we printed this the right size. Yep, we did. Our arrow here tells us where the grain of our fabric goes, and the arrow is going to point up. So if you had a piece of fabric that maybe had a big design on the side of it, you would need to make sure that you had it going the right way so that when it's on the side of your head, it's facing the right direction. In the center here, we have cut line for ear dart. Over here, we have information like the face edge can be turned back. For smaller kids, you can fold up the chin strap. And we have information about the size, our seam allowance, and how many we need to cut. Our seam allowance is 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. They are so close to being the same thing, it's close enough for patterns. And you will want to cut 2 from the outside and 2 from lining. So I'm going to get rid of the Elf and the Pixie real quick. We don't need those for this hood, and I'll just set them aside for later. Remember that mirror image thing? I'm going to accomplish it by folding my fabric. That'll give me a left and a right side, and I want to make sure that arrow is pointing up. Now I'm going to just work on cutting it out. First, I'm just kind of chopping it out into a smaller piece of fabric and cutting the parts that are easy to cut at that angle. And then I'm going to turn it so I can get into the curves and the other pieces that are harder to cut at the angle I originally had it as. It's okay to use a couple little chopping motions to get around those corners or to pick it up to make it easier. I have a big cutting mat here, so I'm going to use a rotary cutter sometimes as well. On the outside, you're going to need to cut that ear dart, just slice right into it down to the point. Now we need to do the same thing with our lining fabric. Again, folding to get our mirror images and cutting around it. Time to make the horn and the ears. If you just want a horse and not a unicorn, just ignore the horn. We're cutting around them to make it easier to put them on the fabric. Take a look at your pattern pieces for more information on how many to cut and how they are assembled, including the fold of the ear. The horn comes in 2 sizes, big and small. Hold it up to your hood to see what size you want to use. I'm cutting out of 2 layers of fabric to make it a little more sturdy. You can do this with fleece, or you can just interface different fabric if you're using it. So now we're just cutting out our pieces. For the ear, I'm again using 2 layers of fabric folded, so I get a left and a right mirror image. So there are, in fact, a left and a right ear. Now we have a left and the right ear cut out, and I also have my horn 2 layers cut out. I'm just going to do the same thing for one more set of ears, so we have the inside and the outside. It's time to make that mane. Grab your pattern and measure where you want the mane to sit. That's going to be the vertical measurement on your mane fabric, and then figure out how long you want each hair to be. Just hold the tape measure up to your pattern, and you'll want double that in the width because it's going to be folded when it's in the hood. I've used a rotary cutter to cut this out, but you can use scissors. Now give it a fold, and you're going to cut each individual strand of hair as thick or as thin as you want. Scissors work great. Rotary cutter also works, but you need to be very careful not to actually cut through that center fold, as that's holding everything together and where it's going to be sewn into the hood. I'm going to layer up the ears for sewing them. I have the insides, which is the part that shows when it's facing front. And I have the outsides, which is this fleece with this lovely texture on it, which I thought might be super cute. So you can see that we have mirror images here. So we have the left and the rights. So we need to put them together. I want to make sure this ends up on the outside. So it's going to go on the inside when I sew. And then I'll put these together. We're going to be sewing along here, not the bottom. No. I've got my sewing machine set up here with white thread. I'm going to be using a straight stitch because I don't really need these ears to be able to stretch. This pattern includes 1/4 inch seam allowance on the ears. You can use whatever foot works best for you, but I know that this foot has a nice edge guide, which will help me keep the 1/4 inch. It's designed for quilting, but you know, whatever works. What you just saw here was that my machine has a built-in dual feed, which is basically like a walking foot, and it really makes everything easier, so I engage it whenever possible. And I am going to bump my stitch length up to a 3 from a 2.5 because fleece can take a bit bigger stitch. So let's get in here. So pop that out because I don't need it. And sometimes it's hard to get things started that have a thickness to them. So you can give a little bit of a push at the beginning. You don't want to push too much because your sewing machine isn't designed for pushing and pulling. It wants to be able to do the work. So you can see how this edge guide here, let me just scoot around here so you can see it. That edge guide sits perfectly so that it takes a lot of the effort out of me trying to follow that seam allowance. I'm going to get to the point here and I'm going to turn, and it's sometimes hard to turn, so it's okay to stop with your needle down and lift your presser foot up and actually give the whole thing a turn like that. Don't expect to be able to do those tight curves, just, you know, winging it around the corner. It's okay to lift the edge up and give it another try. Now we're just going down to the end. We're not turning. This bottom is going to stay open. And I'm going to just grab my next one right here. So we're going to go off of one and on to the next. Feel free to do a little back stitch just to make sure it doesn't come undone when we're flipping it. And slide the next one under. To make these easy to turn, you will definitely want to do a little bit of trimming, particularly at the point. The rest of it should turn pretty easily because this is only a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which doesn't give us much grief when we turn things at all. Fleece is also not going to unravel, so we don't really need to worry about cutting close because it's not going to unravel as you wash it over the years, and cause it to fray later. Okay, I trimmed around all of them. You really only needed to do the point, but here we are. And now it's time to turn them right side out. Just stick your hand inside and flip them. Here's your finger right there at the point. Now, ears for horses aren't really like pointed, they're kind of rounded, so you don't have to worry about pulling out that point or getting it perfect. Just stick your finger in there and use the elasticity of the fleece if you're using fleece. Certainly you can be making these out of any other fabric or fur or whatever you can think of. Folding it like this, it looks like a horse ear when you're done. So you can fiddle with this as much or as little as you want to as you're working. And I'm just going to stick a clip here in the bottom and do the other one. I like to look at them next to each other, kind of gauge if they at least look, you know, maybe not twins, but sisters at least, kind of like eyebrows, you know. Next, we are going to put these into the hood. You can totally leave the clips in to do that, but I really like running them through the sewing machine to get those clips out of my way. This is the outside fabric or the fashion fabric. You can see I have the lining here. It doesn't have a slit in it because it's not getting ears. I'm going to leave that over here. And now I'm going to take a look at these and see which is the outside and which is the inside. Again, fleece doesn't always have an outside and an inside, but I can see that this is a little bit more vivid than that. So I'm going to make this my outside when we're done. So I'm going to place my ear on the part that will be on the outside, because we always put right sides together when we sew. And I want to make sure I think about, you know, here's the front of it, here's the ear. Yes, that looks right. Okay. So now I'm going to lay my ear down. The pattern has a mark to help you kind of figure out where you want to place your ear. So approximate center of ear. It's approximate. It all depends on the type of ear. So you can lay that down and go, okay, the center of my ear is going to be kind of here. Okay, yeah, that's approximate. And you fold this over. And then you're going to be sewing along this line in a dart. A dart just means that you have width at one end and it goes to a point. So we just kind of want this to just disappear. So we're going to do a dart. I'm going to clip those together up here. When we get to the horse ear, I want to make sure it's all the way to the edge or even sticking out. If you want your ear to be a little smaller, cheat it in here, even a fair amount. I'm going to keep it pretty close to the edge, but this is for a kind of a small horse, so I'm going to do a little checking for myself before I sew it. Flip it and say, whoa, my, what big ears you have, Grandma. This is going to be kind of big ears for such a tiny horse. Well, that's easy, okay? This is all your opinion, by the way. You can say those are the perfect size ears for your horse. Or you can say, whoa, those are huge. They need to be smaller. Okay. I'm going to slide these in just a little bit. This clip, I'm going to grab that so we can look at them again. That is a much more appropriate size ear for this little baby unicorn. So we're going to go with that. Now I have to duplicate that on the other side. I think they're close enough. Awesome. Okay, so I get these all ready to sew. Now, as I said, the foot I have on here has this guard, but now I'm going to be sewing over a lot of thickness here. I could totally just chop that off now, but I'd rather leave it where it is and sew, just in case I really hate how it looks when I'm done. I have the chance to fix it. I'm going to switch up just to pretty standard zigzag foot. I am still going to be doing a straight stitch. This just will give me the ability to really see stuff well. And I don't need a specific seam allowance here. What I need to do is make a dart. So it can be pretty narrow. I suggest starting with 1/4 of an inch on the other end if you're not. Now this is my chance to do any final adjustments. I'm gonna pull this way just a little bit so it's all straight. And now we're gonna start sewing off the point. So just, now I'm off. I generally go back a little bit and do a couple more stitches just in the fold. That makes it a little bit stronger. Now I'm gonna do the other ear and compare them to each other. Now you can do any checking that you want here. Those ended up the same distance from the top, roughly, slightly off, but not too far. They ended up the same length. That's the important part. And they're pretty much the same size. I'll take it. I am choosing to add my horse mane, my unicorn mane now. So I'm going to actually sew it in while we're sewing these two pieces together. If you weren't, you would just stick them together and you would just sew this back curve. But I'm gonna be sticking the mane in that curve. One thing we need to do is we need to get these ears out of the way. I like to fold them down and clip them. That way they're not gonna be in our seam line. I have sewn so many ears into that seam. Next up, you need to grab your mane. So this is my rectangle that I folded in half, hot dog style, and then made fringe. So I'm gonna slide one out of the way and just deal with one while I do this. I'm starting down here at the base. I want to stay a little bit from the bottom because we have seam allowance here, and I don't want this to get in the way of the bottom edge. And now we want to stick our other fabric on top and sandwich it. So if this is starting to feel a little unwieldy to you, I've got a tip. Forget about the other side for right now. Let's just sew down this side while we can see everything. Our seam allowance on the hood is 1 centimeter, which is right here at my 1, which is the same as 3/8 inch. So I need to make sure that my seam allowance while sewing this down is less than that, which means this line of stitching will never show. Now that it's all nicely sewn down and out of your way, you don't have all those clips to deal with, you can focus just on putting your other side on. So let's take a minute to talk about this seam, the dart where the ears are. One, you will want to line them up for sure. So look at both of them, put them right on top of each other. Here you can see that my seam allowance is open, so it's laying flat. That's my preferred way. If you push the seam allowance back or you push the seam allowance forward, it will really affect how your horse ears look because it will push them one way or another. Now we need to really think about the seam allowance for our pattern, which is 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch. For me, that is the one line there. So that's where I want to keep everything lined up to. Two edges are together, and we do need to do a little bit of trimming, but I'm dying to see what it looks like. So let's just flip it right side out now. That is adorable. So this is quite a bit of hair, and I can go in and trim it later if I want, if it ends up being too much. And you can see that stopping it before the bottom here doesn't really affect anything because the hair hangs down into it. So next up, we need to take care of our lining. It's the same thing. We're just sewing the outside edge. I'm going to show you the clipping on this one because it's way easier for you to see. The most important part is to cut out or notch this back curve here. But you can accomplish the same thing with much less effort by just cutting it smaller. And again, I can do this because it's fleece. If you are using a woven fabric, you will definitely need to do the notches so you don't make your fabric more likely to fray and fall apart here. But fleece, it's great. I can just trim it smaller. You don't necessarily need to do that neck part. So that is ready to start layering and putting the pieces together. Now let's flip this back right side out, wrong side, whatever. Inside out, there's the right word. And make sure to do any trimming that we need to do. So I got some threads here. This is a good time to deal with the ears. You can leave them long and thick like this, but they will kind of, push at your head. If you really, really want your ears to stand up super tall and not get pushed forward or back, which this is just me moving the seam allowance, so it just depends on where the seam allowance is hitting your head of how they're going to lay. If you want them to stand up super straight and tall, the seam allowance is your key. What you're gonna do is snip these down the sides, because you're trying to be able to open it up and lay it flat. But remember, I actually sewed along here. So instead of trying to do seam ripping, let's just chop that off. And it'll be a lot easier to lay this flat. So you can even go in hand sewing or with your sewing machine and sew that seam allowance spread out. That will help your ear stay very straight up. I am just going to clip this and give it every chance it has of being flat, but not actually go through the effort of sewing around it. Same thing on the other one. So I have all of this ear seam allowance opened up and pressed flat. I'm just gonna leave it like this. Once I'm done with the hood, if the ears are not standing like I want to, I will just do some hand stitching from the outside and I'll have all of this to grab onto to help with my ear shape. Now, I have a lot more here than you would if you were not making your ears smaller. Any amount that you have here can be used to help get your ears to stand up. You can also stick pipe cleaners down through the seam and into the ear if you need more support. So we got that done. Next up, we need to do the same thing along here. So now it's time to layer them up, and we layer things right sides together. And right now we have both of our wrong sides out, so something's got to flip right side out. Let's flip this one. Make sure our ears are not going to get caught up, or our mane. So our right sides to our right sides. Then I'm going to line up this seam here, and I'm going to do it open. If your seam is fighting you, or you have more than one line of stitching, you will need to put them like this, but you can push them at each other and they'll kind of nest right next to each other. That will help make this bump that inevitably exists from having seam allowances smaller, which will be easier to sew, and it will also make it look prettier later when you don't have a big bump on top of your head. So this is basically the only place that I need to clip in order to get this to look good, because I want that in the right spot. But I'll add a couple more clips just to help you guys see what's going on. This is the chin strap, and the curved nature of it does have a perchance to wiggle from time to time. Okay, we have the bottom here. I'm going to just clip it because I can. It almost always ends up in the right spot, and it's also not as big of a deal if it's not quite lined up because it's not on the top of your head. So you'll notice that these are not like a perfect match. One's a little bit bigger, one's a little bit smaller. It's kind of the nature of cutting out fleece. Fleece wiggles, fleece stretches, and you're going to get two pieces that are very similar to each other, but not exact. You just gotta kind of make it up as you go. When we're sewing, we will need to leave a turning hole, which will be down at the bottom. This is the back of the head, just to help you. So we need to leave a turning hole down here. And because of that, I like to start here. If you're using clips, giving yourself a pin marker is a great idea so that when you get to that pin going around the full circle, you go, wow, that's weird. When did I use pins? And that reminds yourself, oh wait, I'm supposed to stop. So the pin is my stopping point. So I'm going to start beyond my pin right here. And now I'm going to get started. I have my sewing machine still set at a 3.0 stitch length. That's just because fleece doesn't need a super close stitch, but you can leave it at 2.5. It's not going to hurt anything. Now we're going to get to these lovely curved corners. If you're feeling a little nervous about the corners, there is nothing wrong with just drawing your lines on with whatever pen you have. Of course, I only have purple, so that's not going to help us see any better at the moment. I have other colors somewhere, but I'm going to do this without drawing my lines. So I'm going to go slowly, and then I'm going to stop with my needle down. I'm going to pick up my presser foot and pivot it. And sometimes you just take one stitch, maybe two. Pivot again. These have pretty straight ends. And then there's a little curve again. And then they have straight ends. And now we're going to go into this cut out. Again, feel free, draw yourself a line on here if you're feeling a little nervous about how far past to go. But there's nothing wrong with just trying it out. So I can turn this way and go, whoa, I did not go anywhere near far enough. Okay, no problem. Try it again. Turn back this way. Ooh, yeah, we're starting to get there. That's almost gonna line up once I'm done. I'm gonna go one more stitch this way, and then I'm gonna take kind of a couple stitches to make the corner here. Totally arbitrary, don't get freaked out about what I'm doing. I just wanted to make that kind of a curved edge. So I'm gonna take a quick check, make sure where all my lines are so I don't get too crazy. There we go. I keep going. Make a good feel. Make sure your ears are out of the way. You're not sewing any ears to the front. So now we're kind of approaching this from the opposite angle. We need to go pretty deep. And then if you turn and check it and you're like, oh, I'm about the same spot I was last time. Awesome. So I'm going to take a couple stitches to make a curve. That's my choice. You can make a sharp point if you'd like. And now I see that trusty pin that tells me something's different. That's where I'm going to stop. So this time we have a little bit more clipping to do. Now, I want you to take those two and just kind of look at them together. You can maybe face them towards each other. Make sure you are happy with both of those and that you like the way they look. These are going to look the same once they're flipped right side out, even though they are slightly different right now. So I'm okay with that. And this is the place where we really need to do clipping. We need to go in here, and if you're using a woven, you'll want to do notching. If you're using fleece, you can just cut a little bit closer around these. This front edge is all smooth, so you don't need to take any off that, but these front curves here can definitely benefit. Do be careful not to cut through your actual line of stitching. If you do, just go back, make a line of stitching just slightly smaller than that, and it'll be just fine. We have everything we need in order to flip this. So when I do this, you see that's really stretchy, right? We need to be careful not to stretch it crazy out of shape, but we are gonna be turning everything through that hole, so it's gonna get stretched. Now we have our chin strap. I'm just sticking my thumb all the way in it and then pushing my finger back out and using that. You can see I caught a bit of the mane here. I'm going through and I'm rocking the seam so I can check to make sure all of it is pulled out. So just a few last steps and we're done. You can do top stitching if you wish, which would be along all the edges. I recommend it. It creates some stability, keeps things from rolling out and in later on, and it gives you the perfect opportunity to close this hole without needing to actually use hand stitching at all. Here. And you need to decide how far in you want to sew from the edge. Top stitching is really like all up to you. It's what you like. I'm going to use a fancy foot. So the side closest to my thumb is longer and the side I'm holding is shorter, which means that it can go over a thickness along an edge and just kind of ride on it. It's great for doing cording as well because the cording will just sit in that little U shape. You can see how it just rides right along there. Oh yeah, makes everything easy. And I can also adjust the width of my needle from the edge to vary my seam allowance as well, or the distance from the edge. So I'm just kind of rolling this in my fingers, and that can really help get the seam right along the edge. But I still have my hole here, so I don't want to rock it too much till I got the hole closed. Brush that mane out of the way. I'm going to set my machine to always stop with its needle down. I'm going to make doing these points a little bit easier. I'm going to lift up my presser foot to get around this corner. See how I'm moving my fabric and turning my fabric? I'm letting my machine do all the pulling. Unless you get a really thick spot, then you can help it out a little bit, or you can use a tool. So I just fold up a little bit of fabric. It's going to lift up the back of my presser foot to make everything even. I'm going to just do a tie off, which is forward and back, or a little back stitch, raise my foot, and I'm done. If I was just doing a horse, the last thing is put the snaps here. The pattern does have a guide to where the snaps go. It's just, you know, close to the edge and a little bit away. You can do one snap if you want, you can do two, or it grows as your child grows, so you can snap two to start with and snap one later, whatever works for you. If you're making this a unicorn, which I am, it's time to work on that horn, and then you are going to hand sew it into place. I know hand sewing is not the greatest thing, and if you don't want to hand sew, you can instead put a snap on the bottom of this, and two snaps actually, because one snap it will just spin. Two snaps once this is together, and two snaps here so it can snap on. But then it is removable, which means inevitably the horn's gonna get lost someday. So let's get this unicorn horn made. I opted for the smaller size of the unicorn horn, but you could have made it larger depending on what size you were making. This is for a small size hood, so I thought I'd keep the unicorn horn modest. I've used 2 layers of fleece here. It says to use 1 layer of fabric and 1 layer of interfacing. Interfacing is anything that will help support that outside fabric. So A second layer of fleece is a good option here. You can also just use interfacing or use a woven fabric inside. The first thing that we're going to do is actually sew along the bottom edge. We're going to use these as gathering threads. If you try to do that after you've sewn it into its shape, it will be harder. So I'm going to set my machine to the longest stitch I have, which is a 6. And I still have the foot on here that I was using to do the edging. There's nothing wrong with that. There we go. And I'm going to want to leave lots of extra thread to make it easier. Okay, these are going to be our gathering threads. You can also zigzag over a piece of dental floss. Now we're going to fold this way and sew those 2 layers together. But you see, like, there's all of this fabric and it's kind of getting crazy, right? Now, when I'm sewing this, I'm going to do my best to kind of make this have a little pocket here and line up all those edges. Yeah, you see how that works a lot better now? Because this is going to end up being on the inside and it's going to be taking up a lot less room. So the interfacing can really kind of cause problems here. If this is just frustrating the crap out of you, guess what? There's an easy solution. Get it out of the way. You do not have to sew this interfacing into that seam line at all. You can try if you want, but if you're using 2 layers of fleece, you may be really frustrated. So just get it out of the way. And you'll want to switch back to your regular stitch length. You don't want to be doing a gathering stitch here. Basically, you just sew off the edge. You keep angling it, but there is a trick that will help get a nice point. Despite you don't really need a nice point on the end of a unicorn horn, they can be curved. Just turn it. Yeah, there's going to be a stitch that is not going right off the point at the end. It's going to be going sideways. That's okay. It will actually help you get a nice point. So we certainly need to trim. You're going to trim the point. And then just a little bit below the point, you're going to want to kind of get super close to that seam allowance. After that, though, you don't need to trim. It's a straight line. It'll be fine. Okay, we're going to flip this right side out. You decide how rounded or how pointy you want your horn to be. And if we look right up in there, we can see all that interfacing, but it will create a lot of structure. As you can see, it's already really helping it stand up. This is pearl cotton. It's what you do thread crochet with. It's also just kind of basically string. You can use shiny thread. You can use little strips of fabric. Do whatever you want, or just leave the little twisty-do off. So I've tied these both together so it's on a loop. And that's because I'm going to do 2 of them together just so it shows up more. And I need to get this into place where it starts. So I need to wiggle it all down the center of my horn. It needs to get out the top. If it catches some seam allowance, it's not a big deal. There we go. You can also just set it down on your table and push down. That's probably the easiest way. It's going to start here as you do that swirl around it, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Next up, we're going to stuff it. And we really want to get that pretty far up there so that the very point gets support. So you want to start with a lot smaller piece than I did. You don't want it rock hard because we need it to be able to squish in a little bit when doing the twirl, but you'll want it to at least have some firmness. And we don't want to put the stuffing all the way down to the bottom because the bottom is going to be gathered up. So now it's time to find those gathering threads. Okay, now I'm going to pull it Up, and I managed to pull the whole thing out. That was not helpful. Okay, looks like we're gonna do our gathering by hand. So now I'm gonna take some big honkin' stitches. So if you forgot to put your gathering stitch in before you got to this point, also this is what you would do. So I'm gonna shove that down. Now feel it. If you think it needs more stuffing or anything else, now's the time to do it. So wherever you stopped, straight across from there, you're gonna grab. And then you're gonna kind of go at a different angle. You're gonna grab it. And then straight across, grab and pull. So you're just taking all of those pieces and shoving them towards the center. So each one of the tips of a gather, just grab it as you sew around. Now that you have a relatively flat spot here, it will be easier to actually sew onto the unicorn. But let's work on this twirl. I'm gonna be totally honest, putting the twists around here is harder than it looks. I suggest you first just kind of do it with your hand. So here's the thing. Yes, this is what you want, right? But the moment that this like falls down, this becomes loose and it can fall off. I mean, it's not at the moment, but it could. So what you need to do is actually secure it as you go. And it can be a little bit complicated. So you can take your chances at just calling it like this and putting a stitch in right here and holding it that way and just saying, okay, it's gonna stay. Or you can try to tighten it up a little bit. So go back up here and you'll give it a little tug. Really trying to like work it in. And you see when I pull too tight, that tip starts dropping down. We don't want that. We still want it to be nice and tall. Okay, so I'm here at the bottom now. Wherever it's naturally falling, we need to use that. Fine, and now I'm gonna go over here to my seam. I'm going to at least reinforce this bottom one, and I may be able to do more depending on if I can get the thread up there. So I'm just taking a stitch over this. It will help hold it in place. And then I'm gonna take this opportunity to slide up to the next one. It's not the easiest thing, certainly. And because I'm doing it in the seam line, it will kind of hide itself. And this one up here has started to kind of slide north. That's why we want to reinforce it. And then lastly, the top one. If your top is feeling a little floppy, you can move some of that stuffing around. So you have a fun opportunity here now that you've already worked your way all the way back up to the point. Is if you want, you can pull this out where the thread comes and you can even do a second row, or you can get crazy and go the opposite way. I've added a bit of embroidery to my horn. It also will keep this swirl in place, and I just wanted to show you what I was doing before I'm completely done. And now I know those swirls are gonna stay in place because I've basically sewn it completely into place, and I don't have to worry about falling apart later when it gets tugged on or anything else. This is certainly completely optional. It's just me being a little bit overzealous with safety. And now we just have to decide where the horn is going. So I have a little bit of mane going on here. And I can choose to put it like over top the mane and like split the mane, or I can put it in front, which I think is where I'm going to put it. You kind of have to imagine it being worn to really like think about where's the best spot. Now, the other thing I have to think about is that this front piece on this hood is meant to be able to be folded back for when the kids are younger. So I need to think about that where I'm placing this horn. I am going to put the seam of my horn towards the back, so it's seam the least, and Just check out the front and make sure I like it. So I'm gonna sink my needle into the bottom here. So I've got that started. Put it in place just in front of the ears. And I'm going to take a bit of the bottom. This is not an exact science, but basically the idea is once you can get it held in place, it'll be a lot easier. So just go around it until it's holding still enough for you to do your real work, the pretty work. Okay, those first stitches were pretty ugly, but now it's held in place enough that I can do the real stitches. And if any of these ugly stitches end up showing in the end, I can just trim them out of the way. I'd like to note that I'm also only sewing through the outside. You can totally sew through both layers of fabric and it will make this a lot more stable, but right now I've only got one layer.
What are you doing?
I am doing hand sewing on a video.
I love you.
I love you. So right now I'm going around right where it is actually touching the fabric when we scooch it down to the base. I'm just going around here and grabbing the horn side, and then I'm getting a nice big chunk of the fabric side so everything is held together. And right now I'm kind of messing with the lining. I want to make sure that everything under here is smooth in case I end up grabbing the lining. I haven't made a big lump in my project. Well, this horn is certainly held on plenty tight now. It's not going anywhere. I do need to see if the bottom has been sewn at all. Yeah, I have managed to grab the underside a number of times. So I need to make sure that it's all laying nicely and that I haven't accidentally grabbed it at weird spots. But it seems to be laying pretty nicely, so it must have been pretty smooth when I grabbed those points. Now what I need to do is just tie off, and so there we go. We have our unicorn hood. You can use the instructions to turn any hood or hoodie into a unicorn, or to add ears to a baby wearing hood or Halloween costume. Thank you for joining me today and making this adorable ad. Don't forget to stop by my website and get your pattern downloaded.